Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Well, sisters, tomorrow is working day, so in the interest of time, I know some of you are still reciting Nawafil, so we'll start promptly with the recitation of Noble Quran. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the most beneficent and merciful. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for blessing us with existence and granting us this opportunity to move towards Him. Respected ulama, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Tonight is the eve of the 26th of Rajab. We have gathered here this evening to commemorate the shahadat of our beloved 7th Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, once again, we offer our sincere condolences to all our brothers and sisters in Iman, our Maraja Taqleed, and best of all to the Imam of our time, Imam al-Hujjah, Imam Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahum. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I would like to start the program by sharing two quotes from our beloved 7th Imam. Imam has reported to have said, "He will be concealed from the view, but the hearts of the believers would not be heedless of his remembrance. Kindness and love to people is half the wisdom." May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enlighten our hearts and give us marifat to follow in the footsteps of our 7th Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam. Inshallah, as usual we start every program with the recitation of Noble Quran. Tonight we'll have our young reciter, Brother Qasim Abbas. He will be reciting Surah Al-Mulk. So I would like you all to please welcome him with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور الذي خلق 7 سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت فارجع البصر هل ترى
البصر خاسئا وهو حسير ولقد زينا السماء الدنيا بمصابيح وجعلناها رجوما للشياطين وأعتدنا لهم عذاب السعير وللذين كفروا بربهم عذاب جهنم وبئس المصير إذا ألقي فيها سمعوا لها شهيقا وهي تفور تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير وقالوا لو كنا نسمع نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير فاعترفوا بذنبهم فسحقا لأصحاب السعير إن الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير وأسروا قولكم أو جهروا به إنه عليم بذات الصدور ألا يعلم من خلق وهو اللطيف الخبير هو الذي جعل لكم الأرض ذلولا فامشوا في مناكبها وكلوا من رزقه وإليه النشور أأمنتم من في السماء أن يخسف بكم الأرض فإذا هي تمور أم أمنتم من في السماء أن يرسل عليكم حاسبا فستعلمون كيف نذير ولقد كذب الذين من قبلهم فكيف كان نكير صدق الله العلي العظيم.
By our young reciter Qasim Abbas, for him and his family, Sehat, Salamti and Barakat, please recite a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At this time, I would like to request Brother Aslam Durrani to please come forward and offer Pursa to Sayyida Zahra Salamullah Alaiha. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
Thank you. Martyrdom of Salawat. खुदा की राह में कारे नुमाया ऐसे होते हैं खुदा की राह में कारे नुमाया تہے خنجر کیے سجدے مسلمان ایسے ہوتے ہیں وہ پیاری پیاری شکلیں دیکھ کر آلے پیمبر کی وہ پیاری پیاری شکلیں دیکھ کر آلے پیمبر کی ستاروں نے کہا اے چاند انسان ایسے ہوتے ہیں جوانی رن سے کہتی آ رہی ہے لاش قاسم پر جوانی رن سے کہتی آ رہی ہے لاش قاسم پر کہ اسلامی جوان مردوں کے ارمان ایسے ہوتے ہیں مسافر کا تن بے سر ہے اور شب کا اندھیرا ہے مسافر کا تن بے سر ہے اور شب کا اندھیرا ہے کسی کی لاش پر گیسو پریشان ایسے ہوتے ہیں قدم پر شیخ کے دم نکلا حبیب ابن مظاہر کا قدم پر شیخ کے دم نکلا حبیب ابن مظاہر کا محبت کے وفا کے عہد و پیمان ایسے ہوتے ہیں خدا ہی جانے دل سے کیا کہا ہوگا نگاہوں نے خدا ہی جانے دل سے کیا کہا ہوگا نگاہوں نے سکینہ کو خبر کیا تھی کہ زندہ ایسے ہوتے ہیں. سنا کر نجم قصہ کربلا والے شہیدوں کا، سنا کر نجم قصہ کربلا والے شہیدوں کا. مسلمانوں کو سمجھا دو، مسلمان ایسے ہوتے ہیں. صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد. فاتحہ. قتل کاظم کا دیا حکم جو عباسی نے، سر کھلے روضے اقدس سے پیمبر نکلے. مرتضیٰ آئے تڑپ کر نجف اشرف سے، بال بکھرائے خلیفہ کے محل میں پہنچے. خواب میں اس نے شہ عقدہ کشا کو دیکھا اور روتے ہوئے محبوب خدا کو دیکھا. نیم خوابی میں محمد کی سنی یہ فریاد، کیا یہی میری رسالت کا صلہ ہے جلاد؟ ہو چکا ظلم سے امت کے میرا گھر برباد، کب تک آخر یہ ستم جھیلے گی میری اولاد؟ راحتیں سارے زمانے کے لیے، رہ گئی آل میری ٹھوکریں کھانے کے لیے. ظلم کیا کیا میری زہرا پہ ہوا صبر کیا، سر پہ حیدر کے چلی تیغ جفا صبر کیا. میرے شبر کو دیا زہر دغا صبر کیا، میرے شبیر کا سر کاٹ لیا صبر کیا. کیا اسی اجر کے قابل تھی ہدایت میری؟ سر بازار پھرائی گئی عطرت میری. تنگ و تاریک وہ حجرہ وہ محمد کا قمر، روشنی کا نہ جہاں دخل ہوا ہوا کا نہ گزر. کبھی ہوتی تھی نہ شام اور نہ آتی تھی سحر، کلفتی شام کے زندان جفا سے بڑھ کر. وہاں ستم چند گرفتاروں پہ بڑھ جاتے تھے، یہاں سب ایک ہی قیدی پہ ستم ڈھاتے تھے. بے کسی ان کی رقم کرتے ہیں یوں ابن حجر، زہر بیداد سے مارا گیا جانے شبر. 3 دن فرش پہ تڑپا یہ محمد کا جگر، بیڑیاں پہنے ہوئے قید سے نکلا مر کر. کلمہ گو بیٹھے رہے دفن کو حمال آئے، پل بغداد پہ لاشے کو یوں ہی ڈال آئے. اور بھی حکم ستم کار سے ڈھایا یہ غضب، ایک تختے پہ رکھا لاشے سلطان عرب. کھینچتے پھرتے رہے کوچا بکوچا اسے جب، فاطمہ رو کے پکاری یہ بسز رنج و تاب. ہائے تاریخ ہے اب سارا جہاں نظروں میں، پھر گیا لاشے مسلم کا سما نظروں میں. شور غل سن کے سلیمان محل سے نکلا، حال تب موسیٰ کاظم کی شہادت کا سنا. اپنے بیٹوں کو ندا دی کہ ارے تکتے ہو کیا، چھین لو لاشے مولائے غریب الغربا. جان پر کھیل کے تب اس کے جگر بندوں نے، لے لیا کاندھوں پہ تابوت کو فرزندوں نے. شیر جو ٹوٹ پڑے بھاگ گئے دشمن رب، کہ سلیمان منادی کے غیوران عرب. ہائے مارا گیا وہ شاہ بسد رنج و تاب، जिसके नाना है नबी मूसा काजिम है लक़ब। सुन के ये आहों के नारे जिगरों से निकले, सर खुले शह के आजादार घरों से निकले। गुस्ले मैयत को जो तख्ते पे उतारे गए शाह, ज़ेरे मलबूस थी जिंदान की सख्ती हमरा। हाय वो तौखे गिरा और वो जंजीरें आह, जिस्म मुर्दा की ये जेवर है शकावत के गवाह। लोग कहते थे मुसलमान वो शकी कैसा है, जिसने जंजीरों में लाशे को जगड़ रखा है। लाश तुरबत में उतारी तो बसत शयोन शयन, किसी बीबी ने कहा हाय मेरे नूरुल ऐन। उसको देखा न किसी ने भी न सुने सब ने ये बैन, ऐ मेरे काज़िम मजलूम अज़ादार हुसैन। याद में प्यासों की अश्कों से धोने वाले, अलविदा ऐ मेरे शबीर के रोने वाले। कत्ल काज़िम का दिया हुक्म जो अब्बासी ने। सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम।
Jazakallah, brother Aslam Durrani bhai. May Ahle Bayt alayhi salam accept your pursa. For his and his family, sehat and salamti, please recite a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, as you are aware, tomorrow inshallah we will hold the Amal of Mab'as. Inshallah at 7 o'clock we'll start with Maghrib and Isha prayers, followed by Amal under the guidance of Hujjatul Islam Maulana Rizwan Rastu inshallah. Grand gesture to celebrate the Mubarak Waladat anniversaries of Sayyid al-Shuhada Imam Musa al-Kazim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Our fourth Imam, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And Qamar Bani Hashim Mawla Abbas alayhi salam. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Inshallah, Jashan will take place on January 24th. Inshallah, we'll start the program with Maghrib and Isha prayers at peak time. Tonight's program is being sponsored by the families of Brother Ali and Sister Hira Jafri and Brother Amjad Safi and Sister Fawzia Safi. For an increase in their tawfiq and barakat, please recite a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. They have requested that we recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of their families marhumeen, as well as your families marhumeen. In particular, we have listed all the names. I think to save time, if you can kindly read the names, make niyat and recite a Surah Al-Fatiha for their Risala Sawab Masbukatan bis Salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Before I invite Maulana, I just want to make two quick announcements. First of all, if you can kindly make sure your cell phones are on a silent mode. Secondly, after the conclusion of speech, inshallah, we'll have a recitation of Ziyarat al-Waris. Followed by Ziyarat, we will go downstairs for Tabarruk. This is something we are encouraging everybody to please go ahead and take a seat, socialize, and have a conversation with each other. But if you're in a hurry and you really have to go, the Tabarruk will be packed, so you can take that with you, inshallah. Tonight we have the honor to host Hujjatul Islam Maulana Sayyid Sulayman Abidi, who will be addressing the Majlis. Please welcome him with a loud salawat. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق أجمعين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين المبعوث رحمة للعالمين، شفيع المذنبين وحبيب قلوب الصادقين، سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وسارعوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة عرضها السماوات والأرض أعدت للمتقين الذين ينفقون في السراء والضراء والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Respected ulama, dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As you know, in these closing days of the month of Rajab, we commemorate the martyrdom of our seventh Imam, the great-grandson and the heir of our beloved Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. And the carrier of the light and illumination of guidance in the darkest of times, our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam. So before we talk a little bit about the circumstances of his life and the lessons we learn from that, particularly the relevance of the lessons of his life to our own time, just a reminder of some aspects of his biography. For many of us, I hope this is review, because we have learned and studied about the lives of our Imams. But it is good for us to review those dates and those reminders of the biography of our Imams, so we can better understand some of the circumstances of their life. These days we have a tendency to want to learn things in a structured and in a formal manner. That's efficient, and it is part of our education in school, and then in college, and maybe even in our careers when we have continuing education. So our learning is formal and structured, and that is very valuable. But sometimes the most important lessons that we can learn in life, they come outside of that formal structure, and they come through reminders of things that we have heard before and that we think we know, but it doesn't click for us and it doesn't fit into our life until it is repeated and until it is something that we digest and we contemplate and not just something that we learn and we write down and we file away somewhere in our mind. And the repeated mention of the biography and the details of the lives of Ahlul Bayt, this is part of that effort to internalize their message and not just to know certain facts and be knowledgeable. Instead, our goal is to identify with Ahlul Bayt and to become their lovers and followers. In fact, love and following Ahlul Bayt is something that doesn't require for you to know a lot of details. It requires for you to know that which is the essence of their message and their life. And the test is, are we inspired by Ahlul Bayt? Today, if we talk about our seventh Imam, there are certain distinguishing features of our seventh Imam. If I can say that after tonight, when I have heard and I have remembered those distinguishing features, that I am inspired to emulate the character of my Imam, then I know him. Even if I forget the details of when he was born and what date he was martyred in and some of those circumstances, but if I have the memory of the life lesson and I am inspired to adopt it for my own life, then I have taken something far more valuable than any data or any facts that I can learn about Ahlul Bayt. So we will talk a little bit about those circumstances, but it is just to set the foundation in order for us to learn from and to then become a follower and an emulator of Ahlul Bayt. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So according to narrations, our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim, was born on the 7th of Safar. That is the common narration, although there are different opinions. In the year 128 after Hijrah, so about 120 years after the death of the Prophet, a little bit less than that. Some have said that it was 129. But the more well-known opinion is that it was 128 years after the hijrah of our Prophet to Medina. And about the place of birth of our seventh Imam, there are also two different opinions. One is that he was born in a town called Abwa, which is between Mecca and Medina, on the return journey from Hajj, which Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq had performed with his family. And that town is known as the town in which the mother of our Prophet, Amina bint Wahab, was buried. And according to one narration, that is also the place in which our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim, was born. The other narration is that he was born in Medina or in the outskirts of Medina, and in any case, it was in Medina that our seventh Imam spent the majority of his life. And then he was taken against his will by the oppressive governments of his time and placed under arrest in Basra and in Baghdad, and he was martyred in Baghdad. And that is where he was buried. Today that region is called Al-Kazimiyya or Kazimain, and that title was given because of the presence of Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam and his burial and the presence of his shrine in that region. So Imam Musa al-Kazim alayhi salam, he was born either in Medina or in Abwa in Hijaz, And his father, as we know, was our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. His mother was a very noble lady, Humayda, and sometimes people pronounce it Hamida. Either one is acceptable. Humayda or Hamida al-Maghribiya or al-Barbariya. She had originally been from North Africa. Some have said that she was of Berber extraction, and others have said that she was of Roman descent or from Andalusia. But in any case, she had come from that North African region into Medina, and she was a very knowledgeable and a very noble woman. Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq had praised her very highly. And when people used to come with questions to the Imam, many times for men, the Imam would answer those questions himself. And when women would come to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq with questions, then he would refer them to Humayda, the mother of Imam Musa al-Kazim, so that they could ask their questions with a little bit more comfort and frankness. And she had the knowledge and the wisdom to provide them answers to their religious questions and their legal questions about their Islamic practice. So this was the mother of our seventh Imam. Now there are some things that were unique about our seventh Imam, or we can say they were a first for our seventh Imam in the history of Imamate. He was not the first Imam. The Shia now, they had been accustomed to giving their allegiance to a successive Imam after the martyrdom of the previous Imam. This was something that initially it was confusing for people, because the governments often did not give permission for the Imams to publicly proclaim their right and their position of authority over the Muslims. So although there was no confusion and no ambiguity about the role of Imam Ali, and that he was appointed by the command of God and by the words of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as his successor, it was not possible for Imam Ali to publicly assert that right and provide that clarity and remove that confusion for many new Muslims, because the government did not allow the Imam to speak and to act freely. And so it was a gradual process for those who had not been present at Ghadir Khum, or for those people who became Muslim after that time, to find out who was the legitimate appointed successor of the Prophet. The same thing is true of later members of Ahlul Bayt, in particular those who were under the influence of the caliphs and of the Umayyads in later times. They did not find out the virtues and the right of Ahlul Bayt, because the version of Islam that they had been given was one that told them that Muawiyah is the relative of the Prophet and he is a close family member, and they called him Khalul Mu'mineen because his sister Habiba was one of the wives of the Prophet. So they said he is the uncle of the Prophet, and for many people they thought this is the family of the Prophet. They didn't know that there was Imam Ali, Imam Hasan, Imam Hussein, who were not just from the same tribe, but they were the household not only of Prophet Muhammad, but they were the household of the prophethood, and they had been honored by Allah with infallibility and with purification, and they were sources of guidance for others. So it was sometimes difficult for people to find out who was the Imam, who was the source of guidance in their time. But now over generations, at least the followers of Ahlul Bayt, those of them who had been guided to the previous Imams, they had begun to find out what were the ways in which you can determine who is the next Imam after the martyrdom or the death of the previous Imam. And so you will see that this clarity, it became more and more visible after the death of Imam Hussein. Believe it or not, many people did not know that Imam Zainul Abidin was the legitimate Imam. Because after Karbala, it was not possible for Imam Zainul Abidin to proclaim what was his right. And maybe a majority of people who had a love for Ahlul Bayt, because they were sincere and they knew that Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet, they were the sources of guidance, but they didn't know who was the person among Ahlul Bayt who was the legitimate Imam. And many of them, they thought it was the third son of Imam Ali Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah who was the Imam. And this was also the wisdom of Allah to protect Imam Zainul Abidin in the era of Yazid, and then in the era of the Zubayrids, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, who claimed to be a caliph in Hijaz. There were multiple enemies that Imam Zainul Abidin had to contend with in his life. Most of our Imams, they had one caliph who oppressed them in his time. But Imam Zainul Abidin, he had two caliphs, or claimants to being the caliph, Abdullah ibn Zubayr in Hijaz, and Yazid, and then after Yazid, you had Marwan and Abdul Malik ibn Marwan, and the sons of Abdul Malik ibn Marwan in Damascus. And so you had two claimants who were all envious of Imam Zainul Abidin and seeking to suppress his name and the love that people would have for him if they knew his character and his attributes and his right as being the Imam. But gradually, Allah, He does not allow the light of guidance to be eliminated. People found out about the character of Imam Zainul Abidin, and they found out about his imamat. And so this process continued, and by the time of Imam Musa al-Kazim now, it had been established among the lovers of Ahlul Bayt that imamat is a continuous process, and it does not come to an end. This was not something that was clear to many of the people in earlier generations. It had become clear to the Shia that imamat was going to be not only among the descendants of Imam Ali, but it was in the descendants of Imam Ali and Sayyida Fatima al-Zahra alayha salatu wassalam. So it's not just that the Imam will be from the family of the Prophet or from Bani Hashim, Muhammad ibn Hanafiyyah and his sons, or Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the uncle of the Prophet and his descendants. They cannot become an Imam. For many people initially, they did not know that the imamat was in the line of Imam Ali and Sayyida Fatima. But gradually this had become more and more clear as the sayings of the Prophet now had spread among the mu'mineen, and as the imams themselves, they clarified in their words and through their lived example that they were worthy of the leadership and the position of being a guide for the ummah. But although that had become clear, there are several things that happened for the first time in the time of our seventh Imam. The first is that he was the youngest person to become the Imam until that time. So depending on the different narrations of when Imam Musa al-Kazim was born, we can say that he was either 19 years of age or 20 years of age, but not more than 20 years of age when he became the Imam. This was a first, that somebody that young had become the Imam. The closest example that we have is Imam Zainul Abidin himself, because he was about 24 years of age when he became the Imam. But the difference is that in the time of Imam Zainul Abidin, most people didn't know about his imamat, because right after Karbala, society was still dealing with the shock of the martyrdom of Imam Hasan and the family of the Prophet, and the crimes that Yazid had committed, and then the crimes that he committed after the martyrdom of Ahlul Bayt in Medina and in Mecca, and then the war between the Umayyads and the Zubayrids. So for the first 10 years of the imamat of Imam Zainul Abidin, most people, they didn't really know who was the imam. So although Imam Zainul Abidin, he was about 24 years of age when he became the imam, but we can say that in the beginning period, the chaos and the shock of the crimes being committed, particularly by Yazid and then by the civil war between the Umayyads and Abdullah ibn Zubayr and his government, it didn't allow people, even in many cases, to do Hajj, to come and to see the imam and ask questions. And so it was maybe about 10 years before people now, they started to really come and visit the imam and learn about the imam. And so Imam Musa al-Kazim, he was the youngest imam until that time. That was one first. Another first is that Imam Musa al-Kazim was the first imam to become the imam when he had an older brother who was alive. Now, for you and me, because we know the biography of the imams, this might not seem to be a big deal. We know that Imam Musa al-Kazim, we know some of his ahadith, we have heard his example, his character, we have heard from our ulama, we have heard from the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, his position, and so it doesn't really cause us any confusion that he was not the oldest of his brothers. But remember, at that time, it was very difficult for people to find out or to have access to Ahlul Bayt. And we will talk today a little bit about how difficult it was for people to access Ahlul Bayt because of the policies of the governments. So one of the ways that people used to find out who was going to be the next imam, and these are ahadith from Imam Muhammad Baqir, from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, they would tell their Shia, come to Medina and ask the people, who did the previous imam make his wasiyah to? I'm not talking about a wasiyah where the previous imam says that the imam after me is so-and-so. That would immediately be picked up by the spies of the government, and whoever had that public wasiyah, that person would be arrested and maybe, if not put in jail, then they might be taken away from Medina, they might actually even be martyred. So it wasn't that public wasiyah. Instead, it was a code that the imams had given their Shia. Ask who was the recipient of the will. The will might have been that Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq would say that, oh my son, I am telling you publicly that bury me in such and such a way. Do my kafan in such and such a way. Now, is there anything suspicious? Every father, every believer, when they are on their deathbed, they make a wasiyah, and they say that this is how I want to be buried, this is how I want to be shrouded, I have already prepared my shroud, this is my kafan. That becomes public knowledge. And everybody in Medina will say that Imam Muhammad Baqir made his wasiyah to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. Not a wasiyah about imamat, but he told Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq that you are going to be the one to lead my prayer and to do my ghusl and to shroud me and to bury me. The Shia who would come from Iraq, from other cities, they would ask who was the recipient of the will. And they would know that that recipient of the will was the next imam. This is the wisdom that the imams used in order to convey a very important religious message in a time when it was politically difficult to say publicly who was going to be the next imam. One of those ways that the imams had told their Shia was that imamat will be in the eldest of the children of the imam. So this is why it could cause some confusion, because as we said, Imam Musa al-Kazim, until that time he was the youngest imam, and that itself, if you don't know that the imam is guided by Allah, and Allah can give them that wisdom even from the day they are born, then to see somebody who is 20 years old, you say, well, you're still a student. That's human nature. Unless you understand what imamat and wilayat is, it can be confusing. Then, the imam had an older brother. In fact, he had two older brothers. One was Ismail. He died in the lifetime of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, about 10 or 11 years before the martyrdom of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq himself. So that was a clear case that he could not be the imam, because it's the eldest surviving son. But then Ismail had a full brother, Abdullah, and he was still alive in the time of the imamat of our seventh imam. So this was a source of some confusion. And then the first is that Imam Musa al-Kazim was the first imam who became the imam, and he did not have a son or an heir after him. Now, this is also something that you might say, well, what difference does it make? But this was also one of the signs that people used to look for, because they knew that the imamat is a continuing source of guidance. So when Imam Ali becomes the imam, then Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein, both of them had been appointed by the command of Allah and by the words of our Prophet. They will be the heirs of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When Imam Hasan became the imam, then Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he was present. Even Imam Zain al-Abidin, he had already been born. When Imam Zain al-Abidin became the imam in Karbala, Imam Muhammad Baqir, he was present, and he was an infant of 4 years old. When Imam Muhammad Baqir became the imam, his son Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq was there. When Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq became the imam, Imam Musa al-Kazim was not there. But his sons were there. So the Shia could say, yes, I can see the continuity of the imamat, although it wasn't Ismail who was going to be the next imam, but the continuity of the imamat that was visible. Then Allah knows which of the children of the imam is actually going to fulfill that role. But the sign, it was present. But now for the first time, you have an imam who is that young. You have an imam who has an older brother. And you have an imam who has become the imam, and he doesn't have a son. Because according to the most common narration, when did Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq alayhi salam die? On the 25th or maybe the 15th of Shawwal. But in any case, in the month of Shawwal, in the year 148. And when was our 8th imam, the son of Imam Musa al-Kazim, born? In Dhul Qa'dah of the same year. So between Shawwal and Dhul Qa'dah, Imam Musa al-Kazim had become the imam, but he didn't have a son. Now, what might have been the reason why Allah would put all of these different firsts in the life of Imam Musa al-Kazim? Why these tests? Well, the caliph at that time was Al-Mansur. And Al-Mansur, he had lived and grown up in Medina. And initially, before the Abbasids had any hope of maybe overthrowing the Umayyads, they had shown their loyalty and their love, and according to narrations, they had even pledged their allegiance to Ahlul Bayt. Not to any one person necessarily, but their call was Ar-Rida min Ali Muhammad. That the people, they have a love for Al Muhammad, they want to follow Al Muhammad, and so the Abbasids, they pledged their loyalty and their allegiance to Al Muhammad, the family of the Prophet. Then as they spread out in the different lands and they called people, people responded enthusiastically. And this is where shaitan comes. They said that, we can grab the government. They used the love that people had for Ahlul Bayt in order to call people and then to use that influence that they had gained to establish their own government. But the difficulty is that Mansur, he knew Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq very closely because he had lived with and he had learned from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. And because of that, whenever the Shia used to come to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, Mansur knew their names and their identity, and he knew that they used to give their khums, they used to give their support to Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. And so, now that he had become the caliph, he sent word to his governor in Medina that, because he was the one who had poisoned Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, he said word that when Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq dies, then pay attention and see who is going to be his wasi, who is going to be the recipient of his will. And whoever that person is, give me that information. Because Mansur wanted to make sure that imamat will not continue. That was his arrogance, that he thought he would be able to stop the command and the will and the wisdom of Allah. So Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, as you've heard, he made a very famous wasiyah. He said, my will is first and foremost to Mansur himself. And then to the governor of Medina, and to Humayda, his wife, and to Imam Musa al-Kazim. And so it was several people in the will, and Mansur was at the top of the list. And so Mansur said, when he heard that news, that we cannot kill these people. And so the Imam, he had, with his wisdom, prevented Mansur from finding out that information which he would have used to try to extinguish the life of Imam Musa al-Kazim before he had even begun his task of imamat. And now we can understand maybe what the wisdom of Allah was in giving an imam who had these firsts. Because he was so young, Mansur now, at the height of his power, he was arrogant and he didn't feel threatened by Imam Musa al-Kazim. And also, there was an older brother, so if Mansur wanted to be suspicious and tell his spies to focus on Ahlul Bayt, then they would go to Abdullah. And Imam Musa al-Kazim, for a few months only, between Shawwal and Dhul Qa'dah. If we take a date of the 25th of Shawwal as the date of Martyrdom of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, and the 11th of Dhul Qa'dah is the date of the birth of Imam Ali Rida alayhi salam, then we have a period of less than 50 days. But that is the time when the spies are active in trying to find out from the government who is the next Imam, so that we can try to stop his message before it spreads. And in that 50-day period, or less than 50 days, Imam Musa al-Kazim, he doesn't have any of those signs that would make Mansur suspicious. Because Mansur, he had formerly been a Shia, not in his heart, but in his tongue. He knew the ways in which the Shia would find out the Imam. He knew the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. He knew the senior followers of Ahlul Bayt in Medina and in Kufa and in other areas. And so Allah protected Imam Musa al-Kazim in this way. But Abdullah, he only lived for 40 days after the death of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. So this was basically just protection that Allah had given for Imam Musa al-Kazim, and also the authentic saying of Ahlul Bayt was that the imamat is in the eldest son, ma lam yakun bihi aha, if there isn't any weakness or any defect in the oldest son. So he was not qualified for the imamat because of his physical defect and because of the lack of knowledge which became visible to people who came to ask him questions. And also he did not survive for a long time. So the truth of the imamat of our seventh Imam, it became clear. And then Imam Rida alayhi salam was born. And so it became even more clear. It took about 2 years for the majority of the Shia to hear the news. In distant lands, news would not always travel very fast, but they eventually came to know who was the true heir. And even though the government was breathing down the nose of the Shia and had that inside story, Allah protected through a miracle the life of our Imam. And that is the first lesson that I want us to derive. Sometimes people think that you have a surveillance state and you have, an increasingly oppressive government. If you are connected to Allah and you trust in Allah, then Allah has ways of providing His protection and His grace that no human being can imagine. You have to act with wisdom. Don't just forward every message that somebody sends you on WhatsApp. Don't be careless. So these examples that I am giving you from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, they show his precision and his attention to detail, not to give Mansur an excuse to immediately discover Imam Musa al-Kazim. It is the wisdom of Allah and it is the planning of Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq. But then you don't live in fear. Once you have taken your precautions, that which is just, that which is true, that which is right, you stand up for it and you trust that Allah will have your back. Because مَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. Allah is not going to leave you in a dead end. Now, how do we see that confidence in the life of Imam Musa al-Kazim? You can draw the examples to our time and the circumstances of our world on your own. But one of the examples that we see from the life of our Imam is when Harun wanted to repeat the Umayyad propaganda. We are the family of the Prophet. And Imam Musa al-Kazim, he stood decisively against that attempt to blot out what is true. Some people, they look at this history, they say that maybe the Imam was speaking of his relationship to the Prophet. No. The Imam was not boasting of his close tie to the Prophet. The Imam is undoing the propaganda of the enemy of the Prophet and the enemy of Islam by explaining to people his close connection to the Prophet and the fact that he is the heir of the Prophet. I'll briefly mention the story. I think many of you are familiar with it. And according to some narrations, this was why Harun finally decided to arrest and to cause the martyrdom of our seventh Imam. Harun had come for Umrah in the year 179, just 4 years before the martyrdom of our seventh Imam. And when he came to Medina and he had his soldiers and his ministers and his generals with him, and so he wanted to boast that I am not just a king, I am not just wealthy and powerful, but I am the heir of the Prophet. And Harun, he made a big show of weeping whenever he would hear people talking about Islam and, praying and valuing religion. Even today, there are many Muslims, all you have to do is say, I declare jihad. They'll say, I'll do bay'at. All you have to do is grow your beard out, and they will say that we will follow you. They don't have the wisdom to look at the character, to look at the attributes of the person, but they just look at the superficial aspect. They say, my hero is Saddam Hussein. My hero is Muammar al-Gaddafi. My hero is Ahmad al-Shara, formerly al-Jawlani. You will find Muslims like that, unfortunately. After 1400 years, the Haruns of their time can still fool them. So Harun wanted to do that, and he went to the grave of the Prophet in Masjid al-Nabi. He said, Assalamu alayka ya ibn Am. O Messenger of Allah, I send you my greetings, you are the son of my uncle. Because Abbas was the uncle of the Prophet and Harun was the descendant of Abbas. He said, Assalamu alayka ya ibn Am. My greetings, O the son of my uncle. And what he wanted to do in that is to tell his generals, to tell his government officials that he carries the heritage of the Prophet, to give himself prestige and honor in the name of the Prophet. Imam Musa al-Kazim knew the risk to his life. As a ma'soom, and even if he weren't ma'soom, his wisdom and his knowledge would have told him, let alone the isma and the protection and the knowledge that comes from Allah, that at this time to challenge the government is not going to allow you to go without punishment. That this was a time when, if Harun had not been challenged, then in Medina and in the presence of so many Muslims, he would have claimed the heir and the heritage of the Prophet. So according to some narrations, Imam Musa al-Kazim was present, or he came, and he went, and bowing his head with tears in his eyes, he said, Assalamu alayka ya abata. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. My greetings, O grandfather, not son of my uncle, but O grandfather, who is my own ancestor. This was not Imam Musa al-Kazim saying that I am related to the Prophet, but he is negating the propaganda of the government. This is an important point. These days I see some people who are followers of Ahlul Bayt, they say that, ISIS, they have destroyed the reputation of Islam. Now when people hear Allahu Akbar, they think, oh no, something is going to happen. You have to run away. And so they say, I'm Shia. They want to create an identity separate from the Muslims because those Muslims, they think they have destroyed the reputation of Islam. Learn from Ahlul Bayt that if people have abused the name of Islam, if people have used the slogan of Allahu Akbar in a way that doesn't give people hope and confidence, but that gives them fear, then you should not run away from that slogan. You should save that slogan, because you should not just speak in the name of your small school of thought. You should speak in the name of the message and the scripture and the religion of Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wa A Shia is not somebody who says that Allahu Akbar is their slogan. My slogan is Labbaika Ya Hussein. My slogan is Ya Ali. Ya Ali and Ya Hussein are your slogan because they are a manifestation of Allahu Akbar. If Allahu Akbar is not in your heart and is not on your lips, and the honor of Allah is not your primary concern, then you have nothing to do with Ya Ali and you have nothing to do with Ya Hussein. If the honor of the religion of Islam and the symbols of Islam and the scripture of Islam are not what you want to save, then what do you have to do with Ahlul Bayt? And that is what you can see Imam Musa al-Kazim did at that time. He said, you cannot claim Muhammad. The Prophet, he gave his life. He sacrificed his most beloved family members, Hamza, Ja'far al-Tayyar, and then the members of his family after his time. Imam Ali gave his life as a martyr. Imam Hasan and Imam Hussein gave their lives as a martyr in order to protect and preserve and spread Islam. Harun, I am not going to let you claim Islam or claim Allahu Akbar or claim Muhammad or claim the Kaaba or claim the Quran. This is the heritage of Ahlul Bayt that Imam Musa al-Kazim will protect and defend with his own life. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala. And so Imam Musa al-Kazim, we have explained that there were numerous firsts in his time. That was the wisdom of Allah in order to protect the life of our seventh Imam. But that doesn't mean that taqiyya requires you to live in fear. No, it requires you to have wisdom and to use that wisdom to save the reputation and the honor of your values and of your faith with courage and with knowledge. Two ahadith of our seventh Imam, just as a reminder for myself and a gift, and then we will draw towards the conclusion of this majlis. Knowledge was the most important aspect of the teaching and the heritage of Ahlul Bayt. These days a lot of people, they don't think deeply about their religion and they don't want to study. They kind of are in a rush to express an opinion. Now we have this fashion that I'll listen to a podcast or maybe a majlis and I think I understand this issue very deeply. But our seventh Imam, he says that فَضْلُ الْفَقِيهِ عَلَى الْعُبَّادِ كَفَضْلِ الشَّمْسِ عَلَى الْكَوَاكِبِ. If you have one person who is a faqih, who has studied their religion with humility and with depth, then they are better than a whole group of people who just spend their time in superficial worship, just like the sun shines brightly than a whole sky full of stars. One sun and a sky full of millions of stars. Which one is going to give you more light and illumination? The one sun. So ibadah, fiqh is also ibadah, but if it's superficial ibadah without fiqh and without study, without depth and without humility, then you might think that, oh my God, I am doing so much. But in reality it is like that faint star that is nothing before the sun. So that is the teaching of Ahlul Bayt. When you want to see how to act, you see injustice, don't just rush to the protest. Don't just rush and take action. First think, contemplate, study, ask your seniors and your elders, what is the wisest and the most prudent thing that I can do in order to defend the truth, in order to strengthen the cause of Islam, the cause of justice. And then act with wisdom. That is fiqh. Fiqh is not just for me to know how to pray. That's part of fiqh. But fiqh is for me to know the priorities of my religion in every area of my life. And the second hadith, and this is a particularly good hadith for us to remind ourselves in the month of Rajab and Sha'ban and Ramadan, because this is that spiritual season when we are trying to better our religious practice in order to receive God's forgiveness and His grace. Our seventh Imam, he says, لَيْسَ مِنَّا مَنْ لَمْ يُحَاسِبْ نَفْسَهُ فِي كُلِّ يَوْمٍ. He is not among us who does not take account of himself and take stock of himself every day. Now, normally, when we do good, we kind of think that, you know what, I've done my duty. So, a lot of students, they're like that. They get a good grade on their test. They're like, okay, I don't need to worry so much. I'm getting an A. And then their next test is maybe a C, because they took it easy. I do a good deed. You know, I spent yesterday in ibadah. Tomorrow you will do the a'mal and you'll say, wow, Shaykh Ridwan, he made us do difficult a'mal. I'm good for the next month. فَإِنْ عَمِلَ حَسَنًا اسْتَزَادَ اللَّهِ. Every day you take account. And if you did good, you gave sadaqah, you helped a family member, you did good deeds, then you say, oh Allah, give me more of this. Not that you take it easy, you say, all right, I've done enough. But you say, this is a good deed. فَإِنْ عَمِلَ حَسَنًا اسْتَزَادَ اللَّهِ وَإِنْ عَمِلَ سَيِّئًا. Many times we do something wrong, and then we say, oh, I just need to forget it. Pretend it didn't happen. Make excuses for myself. استغفر الله وتاب إليه. No. Take ownership. I made this mistake. Don't say that, yes, I was unkind, but the other person also insulted me. I don't control their tongue. I control my tongue. So if I did something good, don't rest and say, all right, I've fulfilled my quota of good deeds for this month. Istazad Allah. Say, oh Allah, give me more. I gave sadaqah, give me Allah more tawfiq to give additional sadaqah. I did good, give me tawfiq to do more good. And if you do evil, then don't make an excuse for yourself or justify it, but do istighfar and tawbah. And that is the character of our Imam that we learn from his life. In Surah Al-Imran, Allah says, وَسَارِعُوا إِلَى مَغْفِرَةٍ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ وَجَنَّةٍ عَرْضُهَا السَّمَاوَاتُ وَالْأَرْضُ أُعِدَّتْ لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Hasten towards forgiveness from your Lord and paradise, the expanse of which is the heavens and earth. It has been readied for the pious. Who are the pious? Generally, we think of pious as somebody who is always doing their own ibadah. Any of us, we have this idea that a pious person maybe is a little bit boring, maybe a little bit mean. When you come to them, did you pray? Right? That's our idea of piety. But piety in the teaching of the Quran and in the example of Ahlul Bayt is not harshness and not thinking about Allah so that you forget to be kind and to be merciful to your family and to your community. Piety is how you bring your love of Allah in your relationship with other people. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ. What is the muttaqeen? Who are the pious? They spend in difficulty and in ease. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ. And they suppress their anger. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. And they are merciful and they are forgiving towards people. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah loves those who do good. And so muttaqeen is explained in this verse. Al-muttaqeen are those who spend generously even when they are in difficult times. They forgive people, they suppress their anger. And taqwa is ihsan, that you do good for the sake of Allah with your fellow people. It is as if Imam Musa al-Kazim was the manifestation of these attributes. It is said that كَانَ يُضْرَبْ بِصِرَارِهِ الْمَثَلِ. Imam Musa al-Kazim was so generous that in Medina people would say the gifts of Imam Musa al-Kazim are a parable. Surra is like a bag, a pouch in which people would put coins, dirham, dananir. So Imam Musa al-Kazim, he would give generously to his friends and even to his enemies. anybody who was in need, such that in Medina, it was almost like it would be circulating that this is the gift bag of Imam Musa al-Kazim. A gift bag is not just, a re-gifted toy or something like that. It was valuables, gold, silver coins that Imam Musa al-Kazim, he was known for. And afu, as you know, the governments, they would oppress our Imam, even members of his own family. We don't have time to talk in detail, but just Harun and his imprisonment. It is said that one reason why Imam Musa al-Kazim had to go from one prison to another, from Basra to Baghdad, and then from one prison to another in Baghdad, is that Imam Musa al-Kazim was so forgiving and so kind that even those who had imprisoned him would say that we have listened to his du'as and he is praying for our guidance and our forgiveness. Harun, take him away or we will set him free. We cannot keep such a pious person, such a noble person who spends his days and nights in prison praying even for his enemies. This was وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. How much Imam Musa al-Kazim was known for that attribute of forgiveness. Let us think about those people that we have a grudge against. Sometimes in our families, in our friends, there are some people we say, you know what, I just can't let it go. I was hurt. I was wronged. In honor of Imam Musa al-Kazim, who was so forgiving that became his most famous title, Al-Kazim, the one who would suppress his rightful anger, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and he would forgive. Take those family members, those loved ones, those community members that maybe I lost touch with because I have a grudge. Maybe I have a rightful anger at them, and forgive and reconnect those ties. And maybe Allah will give us some of the blessings and the grace that will come to those who emulate the character of Ahlul Bayt. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. You would think that Harun, when he heard, even from his relatives, that Musa al-Kazim has done no wrong, maybe it could be a reminder that you should let him go and not blacken your soul with oppression of such a noble Imam. But Harun, he took the opposite lesson. He asked his advisors, who is the most stone-hearted and cruel of my jailers and my officials? And he was told the one person who has not an ounce of mercy in his heart is Sindi ibn Shahik. He said, all right, put Musa al-Kazim in the jail of Sindi ibn Shahik. And now Imam Musa al-Kazim is put in a dungeon where even his prayer he cannot perform. Such a small and cramped space that he would not be able to stand up, that there is no fresh air. He would not know whether it is day or night because there is no window, but it is perpetual darkness. Imam Musa al-Kazim, who had spent all his time in the previous imprisonments in dua and in worship, in one of his prayers now when he is under the jail of Sindi ibn Shahik, he says that, oh Allah, take me towards yourself and end my stay on this earth. And Allah answers the prayer of our seventh Imam. Harun sends poisoned dates, and Sindi ibn Shahik, he presents them to the Imam, pretending to want to give some honor to the Imam. The Imam has been commanded by Allah that it is his time to be martyred. He takes those grapes and he eats a few of the grapes. Sindi says that, oh grandson of the Messenger of Allah, have more grapes. He is pretending to honor him. The Imam said that, Sindi, you have accomplished what you wanted to do. The poison now has entered my body. But so fearful was Harun of the love that people had for Imam Musa al-Kazim that even after that terrible crime, he called some of the prominent people in Baghdad. He said, go and visit the room in which Imam Musa al-Kazim is and see that he has not been beaten, he has not been wounded, he is sick and he will die a natural death. If he is ill, then it is not the fault of the government. Those people, they went and they saw that Imam Musa al-Kazim, he doesn't have any blood, he doesn't have any wound, but the poison has affected his body and he is weak. And the Imam says with a weak voice that this is a poison and within 3 days I will be martyred. And when he heard that, Sindhi ibn Shahik, the color left his face because the conspiracy of the government had been exposed. We will say that Imam Musa al-Kazim, you were suffering for years in one jail after another until you were poisoned. But even those who caused your martyrdom could not admit their crime and they pretended to be your lovers. Imagine what a tragedy it was for Imam Zayn al-Abidi to witness the martyrdom of Imam Hussein. He was martyred and his enemy took pride at his death. When Imam Zayn al-Abidin came out of his tent after the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, then he saw that drums were beating and the head of the Imam was raised on a spear. And Umar ibn Sa'd was saying that we have achieved a victory and we have eliminated those who would rise in the rebellion against Yazid. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, he turned towards the head of his father. He said, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Oh my father Hussein, my salams to you. My apologies, oh my father, that I am not able to perform your funeral rites for the enemy now. They are taking their victory lap and they are celebrating their oppression and their martyrdom of the most beloved of God's creation on earth. For how many days did Imam Zayn al-Abidin keep that grief in his heart until after the captivity of Kufa? It is said that by a miracle, with chains still on his arms and a rope still tied around his head, Imam Zayn al-Abidin was brought back to Karbala. And he said that, oh my father, I have come. If I was not able to give my life to defend you and to prevent your martyrdom, then your son has come to bury the body of the martyrs. Some members of Banu Asad were there. The Imam said that dig a grave and here is where you should bury the body of Ali Akbar. Here is where you should bury the body of Qasim. And then the Imam, he took the small body of his brother Ali Asghar and he placed it on the chest of Imam Hussein and buried father and son in one grave. Imam Musa al-Kazim was martyred in Baghdad. The people came out when they heard of his death and it was as if Qiyamah had come. The entire city was in mourning. The government made an announcement. Hada Imam al-Rafida. This was the Imam which the Rafida said was the leader appointed by Allah. And the people came weeping and they offered their respects to Ahlul Bayt. I can only imagine that Imam Ali Rida at that time would turn towards Karbala and say that, oh my grandfather Hussein, look at your grandson Imam Rida. I am burying my father surrounded by a city of people who are enemies of Ahlul Bayt. But even in their ignorance, the masses of people, they have come come to pay their respects. Oh, my father Hasan, I can only imagine what my ancestor Zainul Abidi felt when he came to bury your body and there was no one to offer their condolences to him. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Oh Allah, we learn from Ahlul Bayt how to have wisdom and how to have courage and how to have faith and place our trust in you. Oh Allah, bihaqqi Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Oh Allah, by the honor that Imam Musa al-Kazim has in your eyes, grant us in this difficult time when there is so much oppression and animosity towards the truth, and it seems like those people who stand up for the oppressed and those people who stand up for principle are surrounded. Keep the faithful and keep the upright in your protection. Guide our hearts to always stay on the path of the truth and to always support the path of the truth. And if oppression increases, then increase our courage and increase our sincerity. O Allah, Ahlul Bayt preserved the illumination of Islam in the most difficult circumstances. We ask you, O Allah, to keep the path of faith and guidance alive in our hearts and to make it a legacy that we pass on to our children and our descendants until the day of judgment. Oh Allah, we ask you to forgive our sins and shortcomings. Protect us from sin and grant us the intercession of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad on the day of judgment. Grant us the company of Muhammad wa ali Muhammad for all eternity in paradise. And finally, O Allah, all of our prayers, anything that we may ask you, those of us who are looking to get married, if we ask you for a spouse, it is not for ourselves. Those of us who have children, if we are asking you for our children to be healthy, to get a good education, to get good careers, then it is not because we want them to be wealthy. Oh Allah, any prayer that we ask you for ourselves, for our children, for our family, it is so that we can serve you better. Oh Allah, fulfill our hajat and our prayers and make us the most sincere and effective servants of Imam Mahdi. Oh Allah, our final prayer on this day of remembrance and grief is to hasten the appearance of Imam Mahdi. If the earth is filled with misguidance and oppression, then there is only one source of guidance. There is only one solution. And we know that that solution is not in our means, it is through Ahlul Bayt. Oh Allah, we ask you to hasten the appearance of Imam Mahdi. Grant us the honor of placing our hands in his hands and offering our allegiance. Grant us the honor of him accepting us as his followers. Oh Allah, grant us the honor of being the servants and the soldiers of the Imam of our time. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Rahim. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح نبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها، ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن، بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سلم، وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله. بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم وطابت الأرض التي فيها دفنتم، وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز معكم. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك، فنعم الأخ المواسي. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر، والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه، الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. وألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في جنات النعيم. صلوات الله محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام على الأئمة الهادين المهديين، السلام على جميع أنبياء الله ورسله وملائكته، السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم جميعا أهل بيت النبوة ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, the tabarak is being distributed downstairs along with refreshments. We encourage you to spend some time downstairs, socialize, but if you must go, packed tabarak is ready to go. Jazakallah.